Goldman is manning, Lori Goldman is manning the Zoom controls. She's a board member with First Things First Okanagan, as am I, Margaret Holm. We're a nonprofit, entirely volunteer climate action organization. So we have this monthly webinar that we call Deep Dive, where we try to explore different perspectives on climate issues and solutions for our communities. We come to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Seal and the Similkameen nations. Now, usually in the fall, this time of year, we're joining the Indigenous communities to celebrate the return of spawning kokanee and sockeye salmon. But this year, the Okanagan Nation Alliance, who are in the forefront of land and river restoration projects that have brought back the salmon, this year they're announcing that the drought and water management by the province really is not adequate and threatens the future of these fish. So tonight's theme is Connect the Dots, and the Okanagan Nation Alliance is pointing out these connections. As the drought deepens, the risks grow for all of us, for farmers, for the fish, for their habitat, for the future water supply for all of us. The fish restoration efforts that are led by this Indigenous organization, they also protect the deep connection that the Seal Okanagan and all of us have to this region's waterways and the plants and the animals that all depend on this river system. So something to keep in mind this fall as we enjoy but also regret the warm temperatures we still are having. Anyway, it's our pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Kiki Wood, who is Senior Oil and Gas Campaigner at Stand.earth. Kiki has worked on many social issues, advocating for queer and trans rights, for accessible education, for housing, harm reduction. She spent 3 years as the National Director for the Canadian Youth Climate Coalition, and Kiki's lucky enough to have been a delegate to COP21 and COP22. So we're all feeling this pressure right now, social issues, environmental issues. Our world is facing many issues, and in many ways they're connected to climate, even if we don't always see the links. Who better than Kiki tonight to show us how to connect the dots, how to stay positive, how to build real solutions through through the sense of community. This topic is particularly relevant because we're this weekend going to be seeing people gathering all across Canada for Draw the Line events, when groups that are advocating for all these connected issues, for climate justice, for migrant justice, Indigenous justice, Palestinian solidarity, they'll be all coming together. So Kiki, I'm sure, will be helping us to sort of understand how things are intertwined in our world. After the talk, there's going to be time for questions and discussions. And also, Lori will be preparing an email that will go out to the participants with a video of tonight's talk and perhaps links that people bring up, any relevant links that come up during our discussion. Now, let's hear from tonight's deep dive guest, Kiki Wood.
Hello, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be joining you this evening. Thank you for that lovely introduction. Yeah, my name is Kiki. I have the pleasure of living, working, playing on the unceded territories of the Lekwungen speaking people. The Songhees and the Esquimalt, who are going back to their traditional name of Kosapsim. And the place that I live specifically in that territory is known as the place of shoaling waters. So the whole name of the nation and the name of the area is really based on the ecological shape of it and the way that the waves move from a deep ocean to a shallow ocean. And I specifically live in one of those areas of water that goes from deep to shallow, known as the Gorge, which connects 5 different municipalities and has become a real sort of thriving heartbeat of a center of this community, and continues to be an important place to people who lived on it in time immemorial and people who are making their lives on it today. Yeah, I work for Stand.earth as a senior oil and gas campaigner. And through that work, I do a whole bunch of things. primarily working on oil and gas issues and primarily working in community. And as part of that, I have the pleasure and privilege of coordinating a coalition known as Frack Free BC, which is a collaboration between Stand.earth, between the Wilderness Committee, and between Dogwood BC. And it's a really special collaboration because it's a place where all three organizations with slightly different things that we're really good at and things that we like to focus on and ways that we approach things get to come together and collaborate to do together something that individually our orgs might not be possible. And I think it's a great model that I'm sure folks in communities such as Penticton can relate to, where you might have multiple different organizations like a climate hub and like First Things First Okanagan that come together, that share, do peer support, that share skills, that share resources, and together you make lots of things happen. And that's a large part of the way that I like to work and the way that we approach things. Um, These days, oil and gas, especially in British Columbia, means LNG, and through that, fracking. Lori mentioned that you folks have screened Fracking the Peace in your community previously, which is the first project that I actually ever did at Stand, was to produce that documentary, and was really the way that I brought myself into this work of sort of understanding what the issues look like, was to go to the places where fracking was happening and to understand what it was, to bring myself up to speed on the issues, and to also start to understand the impacts of people living in that area. Um, and we've really built our campaign around that, around like how people experience these issues and how LNG is actually affecting people, and what it means for us as a province, us as a country, and us as communities. Um, this year, we really wanted to bring a bunch of those different pieces together to really look at the landscape of, you know, communities in British Columbia and the threats that we're facing and the pressures and that our people are feeling right now. And I think it's never been more apparent that we're living in a climate emergency. You know, we experience a lot of impacts already. This isn't like a future problem. I know that, you know, the Okanagan knows the pain and fear that comes with wildfires. I know communities near the Okanagan were the source of floods. I hear that you're in a heat wave literally right now, or you're, you know, breaking heat records, right? And so these are not, these stop being intellectual issues and they start being like very real personal issues that you start to have to adapt your life to. Um, and yet we find that, you know, often the structures that we might look to and the political powers that be, instead of cutting emissions, are expanding and embracing, you know, a lot of the industries that are, we know are at the root cause of a lot of the spike in emissions and rising emissions that are exacerbating these climate problems. Um, and they're doing that through expanding fracking and through building massive LNG export projects. And this means more pollution. It means greater disturbance and harm to Indigenous lands, especially in northern and remote communities where land-based ways of life and hunting and trapping and trap lines are still very much like a way of life, which is slightly different than the way that some urban Indigenous communities experience climate impacts or along the coast. Um, and importantly, that type of embracing and investment of oil and gas further delays, you know, the switching to a lot of real climate solutions that we all know are not only possible, but absolutely essential to a climate safe future. And I think this knowledge can be really overwhelming sometimes. I know it is for me. The scale of some of these issues feel really insurmountable. And I think recently that's only been amplified by the fact that they're also not the only challenges that exist, right? You know, we're finding that there's a greater amount of scarcity for, you know, availability of affordable housing, or rents and mortgages and are getting more expensive. Food is getting more expensive. Healthcare systems are increasingly understaffed or overburdened, or not available, especially in some remote communities. And a lot of these issues are not the same. Exactly. Tariffs, right? Like you can run through them where we have an increase in like global conflict, right? We have an increase in, you know, like nationalization, like all of these things, like there's just like the laundry list. And a lot of these things are connected, and a lot of these things share some really core root causes. But importantly, not all these things are felt equally among all people, right? So as these issues get worse, we also see underlying inequities become exacerbated, and stratification of society becoming also a larger issue. And I think this was a lot of the understanding that we came into this year with, of really wanting to create spaces for people to dialogue about this, for people to commiserate about this, importantly, for people to connect over these things, and for people to have strengthen the fabric of their communities to become more able to resist imminent threats and to increase the possibility of resilience and thriving for their communities. And in the same way that the three organizations in Frac Free BC came together initially as a way of trying to sort of reduce competition in the environmental movement and increase collaboration, we wanted to bring that spirit and that ethos, that value, into the type of programs that we deliver as well. And so this year we partnered with the three of us, as well as the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, and sought to create an event series called Connect the Dots, where we wanted to specifically partner with local organizations and communities all across British Columbia, um, to really create events that felt like they could surface a conversation in communities about what is the most pressing issue, what is the thing that people are feeling most impacted by, and what are the things that people are most concerned about. And stop asking people to choose between the things that they care about, and instead find a way to talk about how the things that we care about, the multiple things that we care about, are connected, and how pulling at a thread over here can make a difference over here, so that more people see themselves as having a place in organizing movements in the province. More people can find a pathway towards getting involved, and ultimately we have a better chance of finding solutions to the problems that I think are most pressing for us, feel really top of mind for the legacy that we leave behind, and for a lot of us, I'm sure, keep us up at night. I know Penticton was home to a Connect the Dots event, a great music in the park picnic, which was sounded awesome, and which I am very grateful to Lori and everybody else around the table who may have been a part of organizing or attending. We've had events like that all over the province in a number of different communities. I hosted a barbecue in the park in Victoria, which brought out about 85 different people, many of whom I had never met or even seen before, despite, living here for several years. And so it's amazing how when we create spaces to gather, we can create an opportunity for connection that hasn't happened before. In Ladner and Delta, they did like a toxic walking tour of the area that will be impacted directly by the new LNG terminal, Tilbury. In Richmond, they did like a tacos and pub night, which was really amazing. And those two events, as the two communities that border either side of the river around this, have given birth to a new organizing community specifically to oppose that project, which is a really beautiful sort of like new connection and new space that has arisen up that needed some tending. Um, I just got back from an annual trip that I do to the Northeast since the documentary, where I hosted a very small but very special gathering in Dawson Creek, um, for community members who are concerned about potential impacts, mostly of water scarcity and the impact of industrial water users like oil and gas on the drought up there, and what that means for the changing way of life for farmers and cattle ranchers. And I'll be heading up to the Northwest for a series of events later in the fall. And so it's been so amazing to sit with people in different communities and learn about the issues that matter to them, and then find ways to connect that back to different things. So if you like, your concern is, like the rise of the far right, and then you like want to talk about climate change, a lot of these things are rooted in some of the same places. And sometimes you have to like dig a little bit further to figure out what that root cause is. But it's amazing to see more movements seeing themselves as part of each other and as connected than ever before. And I think that's something that has a lot of potential. Um, like I said, LNG is really the focus of my work in British Columbia as one of the biggest sort of climate threats. LNG Canada Phase 1 just was the first ever export facility to become operational in British Columbia, which went into operation in June. And when it gets up to full speed and full capacity and is fed entirely through the Coastal GasLink pipeline, will be the largest source point of emissions in our province. And what that represents is not a small amount of emissions, it's a large amount of emissions. And it's not just a provincial emissions issue, it also directly will impact the community of Kitimat through the intense flaring that happens there, the increase in potential health impacts that come from living near industrialized facilities, the amount of public money that went to subsidize that project during the largest deficit that we have seen in British Columbia in the last 2 decades. I think this is like a great opportunity to look at these things and say, like, yes, these are connected, right? When you cannot afford to staff a hospital, but you make more money from the lottery commission every year than you make from oil and gas royalties, while oil and gas is the largest emitter that causes the most climate problems, you can see that like this is a rat's nest of issues that all kind of like come home to roost in one place, and that there are actually a lot of things that are deeply intertwined here. And ultimately, it has a lot to do with priorities and political will. And that is a place that communities have a huge role in actually being able to provide pressure and be a force for change. Um, and not every community is living near an LNG facility. In fact, I say most communities in British Columbia are not living near an LNG facility and are not living near a fracking well. And that's to be expected. But it's amazing the way that it does still affect us all, right? We know that not only is LNG affecting people's health in terms of a rise in birth defects and a rise in rare brain cancers, but it also puts a strain on the healthcare system as a whole. When your citizenry is impacted negatively by an increase in health issues, then there becomes greater demands. And when you have a lot of communities that you're flying in from other provinces to work on projects, but you're not increasing the availability in that area, such as the 5,000 person man camp that was erected outside of Kitimat for 5 years, while opening no new hospital space, while hiring no new nurses or doctors, and then expecting that community to be able to service that additional population, you put a huge strain on your social services and your public support. And that, bleeds throughout the entire healthcare system of the province. And it's also about affordability. Life is getting more expensive. Housing is getting more expensive. It's getting harder to find. And we know that the province alone gave LNG Canada a $6 billion subsidy package to build that facility, which is entirely owned by like companies that are not Canadian, right? These are owned by foreign investors. This is owned by Shell. While a company like Shell posts record-breaking profits. And so it's, I think, sort of beholden upon us when we see things like that to really think about, does this represent our values? Does this make sense to us? Is this serving us? And if not, what can we do about it? And none of this has even talked about, energy sustainability. So whether or not LNG is even the commodity that we think has the most value, and whether it's something that we want to see as a big part of investment of the type of energy that BC creates. We have this incredible situation in British Columbia of having a relatively low carbon, I won't say low impact, but low carbon energy system. A lot of our power comes from hydroelectric, which absolutely has an impact. And as I said, I was just up in the Northeast and saw for the first time the Site C reservoir and spent quite a bit of time talking to landowners who were forcibly displaced by the flooding of that reservoir. So there are definitely lots of things to say about hydroelectric. Um, but as a province, we're not in a position of needing to move our electrical grid and our energy systems away from gas and oil or nuclear as some, or coal or home heating oil, which is the case for when I lived in Nova Scotia. I still lived in a home on home heating oil, which is sort of wild in this day and age. And so um, this choice that we're making to extract gas and ship it and liquefy it and export it is actually not for the health and well-being and survival and comfort of any of the people who live in British Columbia. We know about only 12% of the gas actually stays in the province and is needed, which is a number that is small enough that is absolutely feasible to shift off of and is not essential. We know that it's absolutely possible to ban gas in buildings and to move to fully electric. And as we're building out this infrastructure to extract more and more gas just to sell it to somebody else and burn it somewhere else and trying to like get those emissions off our books, there's a social and political cost for that as well. So the cost is not only environmental through emissions, through land disturbance, through water scarcity, and potentially through water contamination and soil contamination in the future, but there's also what we're spending energy not electrifying, not electrifying new homes, not electrifying and expanding transit, not making available new low emissions vehicles or communal fleets, like not imagining a new way of living, just doubling down on the things that we've always done in the past, even though we know that they're finite, instead of dreaming of a new economy that takes us into a future that feels innovative and that feels like it is really like learning from the past and planning for the future. And doing all of this while kind of greenwashing it, right? While saying that because we have environmental standards in a country like Canada and some other countries have lower environmental standards, that our gas is greener and cleaner. And because we're going to find a way to electrify some of the fracking wells and we're going to find a way to electrify some of the terminal, that our gas is lower carbon than anywhere else in the world. And ultimately, these are just shades of less bad, right? They're not ever low carbon. They're not ever green. They're not ever clean. And at some point, it's just sort of making excuses for why we should get to keep doing things that other people are doing, even though everyone is getting hurt by it. Um, and I think bringing it back to like connecting the dots, I think this is, one of the reasons why events like this are so important is because, there are lots of issues that are really important to Penticton and communities in the Okanagan that are not just LNG, but are impacted by our province's focus on things like LNG. And so finding a way to think through like the issues that are most important to your community and then bringing people together in the way that you do to take action on them is absolutely the model for what we need to be doing. And it's a lot of what we're thinking about at Frack Free BC moving forward is seeing like such a strong need to strengthen our organizing movements throughout the province that we need to sort of continue to build groups exactly like this one in even more communities, to grow groups exactly like this one and the ones in other communities, so that when we start to see that there are imminent threats on the rise or threats to us now, that we have the power to actually come together as a collective and to take action and demand change and apply pressure. And that's why I think it's so amazing that you folks are involved in Draw the Line, because these interconnected issues in our own province and in so-called Canada are unique. We know that these are playing out in the same way that these tensions are playing out all over the world. And so that's why it's so amazing that communities all across the province, all across the country, all across the world, including yours, are going to be participating in Draw the Line this weekend. Because I think Draw the Line is itself a call to action that's part of this like global call to action that's really bringing, calling on communities to come together, to make a public declaration, to make a public statement, to make a public, action together to call for a better future. And I know that there's one plan in particular, and I don't have the details, but I know that Lori does. So if you're not already involved in organizing it or planning on attending it, then I'm sure that we can pass that information out tonight and in the follow-up. Um, and I think it's a great example of what feels possible when we connect the dots between things like justice and economic turmoil and ecological and climate catastrophes and political instability and attacks on fundamental human rights, and take that power back into the hands of people in the community to say, we will not sit idly by and watch these things happen, even if we can't actually quantify in the moment exactly what change we're making. Change has always been made from the bottom up, and we will come together and we will gather and we will make plans and we will act. And then one day we will be able to look back and say that we were a part of the change. Maybe that's where I'll pause. I know I haven't taken all of my time, but it feels like a
Well,
good place to pause.
thank you very much, Kiki. And this is just the start of, I think, a dialogue with the other people in on tonight's conversation with you. So maybe we'll take a pause and let people think about questions they'd like to ask. And I'm gonna turn on my video and give myself the first question, which will allow people to think of their own questions. You know, a lot of us, I'm sure, on this call have been seeing themselves as climate and environmental warriors, activists for a long, long time. I remember fighting against LNG 1. You know, now we're talking about LNG 2 and Site C. I find it hard to find any hope to see a crack in the full steam ahead approach of the BC NDP government to LNG. I just attended a talk by Iglika Ivanova, I think is her name, from the BC Policy Solutions, who talked about the fact that BC is actually doing very well economically. And interestingly, though, we have very low provincial revenues from all of our resource industries, including LNG. And so, you know, the proof is there that there's not that much benefit. And like you said, that these are foreign investors. We have another, LNG 1 was started by a, liberal government, but the NDP are seeming to have bought into the same belief that we need this in our province. What hope can you give me that there is some crack, some avenue for us to affect the decisions of our BC government and is part of that perhaps the health impact study that where everyone is talking about?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I hear you. I think keeping hope alive is a very challenging thing. I sometimes like joke that like it's the hope that'll kill you. But it's actually the hope that gets you through. And I don't think that I could get up every day and do this if I didn't feel that there was some hope. And I think that that feeling of hope comes from me of understanding that politics, like everything else, tends to be cyclical. And we've been at better times than we are at now, especially when it comes to climate. And we will be again. And where we come in and the things that gives me hope is that like we are actually a part of that force that like creates momentum in a cyclical environment, right? That like keeps it like gets it going on the next curve. Um, I know that a lot of the BC NDP's approach to LNG right now since the last election seems to be a real reflection of seeing the Conservatives as the biggest threat. And with the fall sort of the BC Liberals, it has created a huge amount of space for the BC to move within. And where they see the Conservatives as being the biggest threat, they have like cozied up to or become magnetized a little bit to co-opting as much of conservative talking points as they can. And so it's seen them move quite a bit to the right on both environmental and social issues. Seeing the like environmental policies like come up in the last election as like a big sort of move to the right on some social issues. Um, and their approach to climate, absolutely, we're seeing it come directly out of that playbook. I think it's also coming from a place of deep fear and like protectionism. I think it's coming from like they're also not seeing enough revenue. They are also seeing a rise in deficit, and these are big problems that they also are not sure how to solve. And historically, it has taken quite a bit of public investment to get new industries up to a place where they create strong revenue, and they're not in a position to stimulate that. And so I think it's coming from a real place of fear. And I think what that says to me, looking at that, is that they actually don't feel a responsibility towards their base to get them reelected because they would rather like fearmonger people around keeping not voting conservative than voting NDP. And what we can do is to like create our own sense of sort of like fear and repercussions and remind them that there is a political cost to this strategy. That there, a political cost to staying further to the left is the potential of the conservatives getting in, but the political cost of going to the right is that their base abandons them and they absolutely like, what's it called? Guarantee a conservative. And a little bit of this is like it gets caught up in a bit of the cycles of electoral politics that can be really unsatisfying. And so I think the other thing that gives me hope is like taking the long view of saying like we are not going to have David Eby to get forever. We are not going to have this policy position forever. We are going to make the like do the best that we can with the current political conditions, and we are going to plan for the future when we have created a crack or we have identified a crack, and we are going to be strong enough to take advantage of that situation because we did the work in the off times. Like we gathered and we organized and we built strength and we built power and we got ready. So I think that is a big part of what gives me hope. Like I came up as an organizer under Stephen Harper. It can always get worse. um, that's like a bit of like an enemy you know how to fight. I will say like it is challenging under the ADP. They should be the most progressive, government that we've had, and yet it doesn't feel that way. And so there are no easy answers to that question, but there are always possibilities.
Thank you, Kiki. I noticed that there's questions from Don Gayton and Lori, and I wonder, Lori, if you might stop the spot, since we're a smaller group, stop the spotlighting. We can all turn on our videos perhaps, and then just have people raise their hand and I'll notice you, and you can do it physically or with a little tool, and then we'll just let you ask Kiki in person. So Dawn, would you like to make your comment or question to Kiki?
Yeah, that I just kind of threw that out. But my real concern is the fact that, LNG is a profoundly important issue to fight on. But, I live in Summerland and I go look at Highway 97, 3 or 4 times a week. And that to me is where the real problem is. We are an automotive driven society. Uh, and that's the one area that I think the average person can control. And Kiki, you mentioned earlier mass transit. I think the Okanagan Valley is perfectly set up for mass transit because you can go from Osoyoos to Vernon all in a straight line and pass through 7 different cities. Um, and but I find myself driving my car to a climate change protest, and I'm fully aware of that irony. Um, but people like myself need to keep pushing, moving ahead, and saying mass transit is something that we can put our hands on, we can deal with locally, and it will have an impact. Um, And I think, Laurie, you and I talked about this a while back, the notion of doing like some PR work. I mean, nobody knows about the fact that you can go from Princeton to Vernon on mass transit. The schedules are hard to figure out. but we need to do some public PR work, maybe, get a gang of people, get on a bus and somehow promote the fact that we do have the beginnings of a mass transit system in the Okanagan.
Yeah,
Thanks,
I think
Don.
that's a great example. And I think, yeah, it's a great example of sort of figuring out like what is the thing that people really connect with, that people feel really passionate about, and then like channeling that to sort of be like, great, then that's like the thing that will actually make a really big difference in your community. And that sounds like a great thing to focus on. And, I don't think that the driving thing is as ironic as other people do. I think that like, people just got shamed around that a lot. We are living in like a system that we have limited other options. And so like we need to be okay with that while working to create more options for ourselves. So yeah.
Lori, you had a question?
Yeah, my question was just about how when you were up, like let's say in Dawson Creek, talking to people who want to make a change in the transition or they're worried about water, when you have pushback from the people in the industry, which we always hear, but now it's getting way more volatile. People they have no real barriers to volatility and anger and like how does that work in an area like the Peace where people are really affected by fracking, uh, but the workers don't want to give up their paycheck.
Yeah, I think that I think the unpacking that answer could take a minute. It's definitely a very interesting environment. I don't think it's unique to, like boom and bust, any other like boom and bust resource town, but I do think that it's unique to some other communities in British Columbia. Um, Although not ones built around a mine, like there are a lot of really like communities that only exist because there was an intensive resource like industry there at one point that was built around that and then collapsed. I think that it's definitely a challenge. A lot of people moved there to farm, to raise their cattle, to raise their kids, and stay there because it is beautiful and it's their home. And it's getting increasingly hard, I think, for a lot of people to stay there, and it hurts to sometimes to live there, I think. Interestingly, I think you're right that we're seeing, less of like a veil and less of a filter on some of the volatility and vitriol that comes from opposition within the oil and gas movement. But the bigger threat up there is less the workers and more the companies themselves. I think the companies as institutions tend to have very bad manners and very bad practices when it comes to working in communities. The workers themselves, I think there's a lot more empathy for. Not that many other industries that you can get like $150,000 starting salary on a ninth grade education. So I think it's really hard to argue with that. I think that's the place that I feel like it's really important for like governments like the British Columbia one to actually jumpstart new industries that are a fit for those people, right? When we talk about transition, a lot of it needs to be demystified. It can't be just sort of like, oh, we're going to retrain you for some other job. There are actually a lot of jobs that wouldn't require retraining that could be built up into a whole new industry that could employ the same people in the same communities with the same skills. And that is something that looks more like a solution. So wind and solar are part of that. But like a lot of things, those jobs are in construction, not in operation. And those jobs are more short term and those jobs are more highly specialized. But we have a massive, massive orphan well problem in British Columbia. And that represents a huge future liability for those communities and for the province and for the federal government. A restoration industry that looks to like remove that infrastructure from the ground and restore that area. A lot of that is skills that are held by people in the oil and gas industry. A lot of like the safety skills you need to know about putting pipe in the ground are the same that you need to know to take pipe out of the ground. And so that is a huge untapped industry for that area that I think could be utilized. There's also a great opportunity for geothermal in that area that has been largely untapped because geothermal is place-based. And so if you can't transport it and sell it, it's not as seen as useful. But I think it has a lot of potential. And again, it's a lot of the same skills. So I think that there's a lot of options. I actually think there's a lack of like political imagination and political will to come up with new industries. Like we're more concerned about like server banks and like AI stuff and clean tech than we are about some of the things that are already on the table as viable options, like EV manufacturing and, a lot of other things like that. So yeah. As for how people deal with it personally, they fight it and then they either decide to stay or move on, and they find solace in each other as a community.
Catherine Gibson in Kelowna has a question. Go ahead, Catherine. Oh,
Tracy was next.
oh, sorry. Pardon me. I didn't see that. Go ahead,
Hi.
Tracy.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to Don, actually. I put something in the chat. There is a Okanagan group, Okanagan Transit Alliance, and they're working on mass transit throughout the Okanagan, better transit schedules, locally owned, not internationally owned. So it might be worth your while connecting with them and getting involved with them if that's something you're interested in. I was
Thank you.
actually wondering, Kiki, I mean, we had some good MLAs that were elected. I'm not going to name any names. You don't have to name any, but there were some progressive people that ran and got elected, and I was kind of hopeful that, and I know some of them have got some good positions, but I was kind of hopeful that they would be able to get a bit of a climate mindset going in the party. How likely do you think that is? And what could we do? I mean, one person I'm thinking of, she's not the climate person, she's got a different position, but like, well, what can we do to kind of support those candidates, even if we're not even remotely in their riding? Or how can we just kind of get the progressives to get change happening within the NDP? And that's my first question. We'll stop there.
Yeah. I think it's a very worthwhile question, and it's definitely something that we came into the year thinking as well, that it's like, oh, there's so many great people, and who got not only made it in as MLAs, but also like made it into cabinet, and that creates a lot of opportunity. I think we've seen that political landscape shift quite a bit with bills 14 and 15, and like the way in which power has been centralized and fast-tracking legislation has been used to take advantage of the fear created by the tariff situation to not only reverse ourselves on the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, but also on environmental legislation and assessments, and also on, I would say, just values, just like traditional NDP values. I think we've found that some of those folks are doing everything that they believe that they can, everything that they believe that they can. I'm not sure if it's everything I believe, but it's everything that they believe that they can, behind the scenes within government, within their roles, to advocate for the change that they think is needed. I think I don't have a crystal ball, but if I am using my political brain to imagine some of the things that's happening, some of the things that I think is happening is that they're brand new MLAs and brand new ministers who aren't as up to speed on exactly what they're doing as some of the people that they're up against. I think some of them have not gained the political capital that sometimes you need to convince other people to join what you're doing in caucus. And I think that there are people who got into politics to make a difference, still believe that they can, and so aren't willing to sacrifice their political political career on any one decision. And that's what happens if you, as a cabinet minister, you vote with the party. The minute you stop voting with the party is the minute that you don't have a job anymore. That's what it is. There's really no option to break ranks unless you're looking to sacrifice your entire political career and no longer be in that job. And so I think that creates intentionally so super high stakes for anything. People have to, like, with every decision that they are forced to support, ask themselves, is this the hill that I will die on? Is there really no other good that I could do by staying here? And I think it's a really common thing in politics where people often allow a lot of things to happen on their watch with the idea that if they just stay long enough and get good enough and build enough relationships, they'll eventually be able to do the things that they came there to do. But by the time that comes around, you've lost so much credibility and lost so much of, the like trust of the people who got you into that place, that change is actually no longer possible. And I think that that's a really heartbreaking thing about our political system. And I think I'm not in either of their writings as well, but thankfully, as cabinet ministers, they're actually accountable to the whole province, not just their constituents. And I think what we need to do is show them, like, that there's a political cost for not doing what we sent them into government to do.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kiki. Catherine, would you like to make a comment or ask a question?
Sure. My concern is over jobs. People are scrambling for jobs now, and we've lost a lot of jobs regarding the tariffs. So how can we frame an argument around green jobs versus fossil fuel jobs for a just transition? So my question to you is, how many jobs do you think are going to be created by LNG 2 in 5 years versus a national electrical grid that we can start now in phases? With indigenous-led solar projects. Solar's at a new low in cost to develop. Can we not build an argument around that? We have jobs now with the national electrical grid. We have indigenous-led solar projects. It's going to take us 5 years to get LNG 2 off the ground. And to what end?
Yeah, I absolutely think that is, like, exactly the kind of argument that we should be making, because I think you're absolutely right. There are a lot of like things that we can do with the electrical grid, with, like wind and solar, with projects that we can roll out that create like a long-term industry for jobs based on a phased plan of building and development. The interesting thing about LNG is, LNG Canada Phase 1 created about 5,000 jobs for about 5 years in construction. But that's just it, is most of those jobs are in construction. And a lot of jobs in oil and gas are, unless you're actually like, someone who works in drilling or someone who's like a pipe layer. And frankly, a lot of those jobs we actually still bring in from Alberta. A lot of jobs in oil and gas are in construction, and like, we have a lot of other things we need to build too, right? And so what are we not building when our construction jobs are in oil and gas? Like, what sort of like affordable housing buildings are not going up fast enough? What transit infrastructure is not getting built fast enough? Like, what things are we actually not able to build? Are we sacrificing because we're devoting this entire construction workforce to oil and gas? And so I think that the jobs-based argument and the economic argument is absolutely the right one. And I think it's the one that will break through to people who don't see themselves in the climate movement, and also, I think, to politicians. I think one of the places that we're finding is a little interesting is that we want to talk about affordability, and we want to talk about jobs now more than ever, but we're not always seen as credible on those subject areas as people in the environmental movement. It's sort of thought that, like, oh, your subject area is like, sort of like environmental things, like conservation things, like maybe wildlife, like maybe emissions. It's a little hard to tell. And I think that we really need to just sort of demonstrate that actually there's huge value in a really well-informed electorate, and that we all need to be concerned with these things. We all need to be talking about them, and we definitely need to be talking about them to our elected officials. So I think you are exactly on the right track, Catherine, and I fully support that. And I think that this actually ties in a little bit with something that Dawn wrote in the chat, which is like where those numbers are coming from. And that analysis around the revenue, I'm getting directly from the BC budget. especially in the footnotes, which is a great place to look for things. It details both like the current BC oil and gas revenues and the projected oil and gas revenues over the lifespan of the 3-year budget. The other place that I'm getting some of that revenue numbers is actually from the BC Energy Regulators new sort of report on water license fees. So Stand is going to be putting out a report next month, which is our third sort of in a series of annual reports on industrial water use in the province. And we found that in 2024, the oil and gas industry in BC actually increased their use of fresh water that's coming directly from lakes and rivers by 50%, even though that region is moving into the 3rd year of a stage 3 drought. And in the position of having to talk about like building a water pipeline from WAC Bennett to Dawson Creek because they are so concerned about water availability long term. And we also crunched the numbers. And so the oil and gas industry in 2024 used 9 billion liters of fresh water that is permanently removed from the water table. It is poisoned and toxic and cannot be returned to the water table. And for that water, they paid $2.25 per 100 million liters, which amounts to less than $20,000. So, like, thinking about revenues is like, I don't want to talk about a fair return on our resources. It's not the language that I like to use. But the minimum, as we talk about making better plans for our future, has to be like making the financial cost for these industries to operate in British Columbia be at least at par with the actual value of these resources and the cost for what these industries, like the toll that they are taking on our environment, on conservation efforts, on healthcare systems, and on wildfires and floods. Right? That has to just be like the bare minimum. Like we all need water to live, so you should have to pay like an arm and a leg to access that.
Kiki, the average
sorry, I was just gonna
needs to hear the number that you just quoted to us. That is absolutely mind-boggling.
Yeah, it's like mushroom cloud out of the brain level numbers. But yeah, sorry, Catherine, what were you saying?
I was just going to say, and look at the number of jobs we could create across Canada, building a national electrical grid.
Yeah.
And sustainable jobs.
Yeah. I'm with you. Yeah.
I have another question, Kiki. You talked about how the entire NDP has jumped on board with drill, baby, drill, and so on. Do you think that part of the reason for that is because of the collapse of the Green Party? That there's no more opposition to the left. They're all just worried about the Conservatives and protecting that territory in the middle.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, it's funny like thinking about the collapse of the Greens because like I mean for the first time they have 2 people in there as a party, which is sort of not for the first time, but again, which is sort of amazing. And I think there's a lot of really interesting things happening in that space. I'll be very curious to see who wins the Green leadership race because I think that could be kind of like a new era for the Green Party that has the potential to really change politics in British Columbia. But I think, yeah, sort of some changes in that and the collapse of the Liberals has created what feels, I'm sure for them, like a 2-party system, which is just a very different dynamic when you're working in a binary like that than when you're working in an ecosystem of 4, where like you really have to corner your area and differentiate yourself from all the others. And when it's like us or them, and the them is sort of wild that a lot of those people got elected, right? It's just like there's no guardrails. And I think it is allowing them to like spread a lot further than you would normally see them move from their message and from what their base is used to. And I would say comfortable with. And I think they're benefiting a lot from fear. And I think that really reflected the limitations of that strategy by like the narrowness with which they won that election. So yeah, I think those are my general thoughts.
Bottom line is we're no longer the left coast.
Right.
Yeah.
I think we're going to have to wrap things up, but first, I'd like to just hear from Tracy, who's patiently had her hand up, and then we'll let Lori talk about some upcoming events. So Tracy, go ahead.
Yeah, so like Don said, those figures that you were quoting and those facts that you were saying, like what are we not building because we're doing this? What are we not because we're doing this? I think, Kiki, that would be actually an amazing opportunity for Stand to host some webinars where literally just those very succinct things, like a letter writing webinars where people join, and while you're on the call, you're doing a letter, and it's a letter to the editor, it's a letter to your MLA, it's a letter to the cabinet minister. You know what I mean? As long as people aren't doing the exact same word for word, but I just feel like that might be an opportunity to mobilize people because it was so succinct what you said. It wasn't a whole paragraph of talk about one subject. It was, what aren't we building? What houses aren't we building because we're doing this? That's just my 2 cents, because that was just so powerful what you said in such a short amount of time. And it really got directly to the heart of the issues.
We'll be sending out
a good question from Catherine that elicited that response.
We'll be sending out something tomorrow morning or the next day about this. And Kiki, is it possible that you would have a link to either a seminar you've done or something that's written that talks about, for instance, the water use and some of these other points that all of us in our different groups could use as ammunition?
Yeah.
Anything you could provide to us
Yeah,
to share
totally.
with people in on this call would be great.
Yeah.
Even the fact about the little revenue that's paid, which is a shocking statistic, and all the amount of water that's contaminated, that in itself would be a really useful piece of information to share with us. Be good.
Yeah, totally. So I have a blog that I wrote a couple months ago that details some of the stuff that came out of the budget around the revenue. So I can provide that to you
If
because
you could
that's
give us a
publicly
link, that would be
available.
really
Yeah,
terrific.
for sure.
Thank you.
And then I have a presentation to the Parliamentary Budget Committee, which details a lot of the water issue, but we just got new data like in August on that. And so we don't have anything publicly available yet, but we're going to be releasing our report on October 8th. And we are looking at doing a webinar as part of that. And so I will make sure to make that available as soon as it goes live.
Thank you. And thanks,
Yeah.
everyone. I'm going to pass things on to Lori for the last few words.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Kiki. That was really great. So much information and definitely connecting all the dots. Really connecting all the dots. So I just want to say briefly what we talked about already was that there is the draw the line. And so in Penticton, for the people who are on the call who are in Penticton, we're meeting at North Gyro Park at 11 in the morning. And hoping to get to Veterans Park by about 12:10 if there's not too much chaos. And then we're just going to have songs, stories, and solidarity. And it's going to be with Penticton for Palestine and perhaps the Rainbow Connection here. We're trying to get other people and groups involved because we want to build connection and collaboration ongoing because we're all affected by the way climate is, the way austerity is talked about, and the potential that we have to do better and to raise our voices together. We've got to do things together. In Kelowna, Cathay is here. They're having a sit-in at the library at the City Hall, and she's done a lot of work mobilizing that. What time is it at, Cathay? 1 o'clock?
Endo? And don't forget to meet at the Okanagan Regional Library to make a sign. Rama funded this.
What time is
And
that?
so we're pleased to announce that 11 a.m. at the Okanagan Library. And then at 1 o'clock, we'll all march down with our banners that we've made and signs to the City Hall in Kelowna.
That's great.
At
And
1 o'clock.
Janet is up north, and there's something happening up there. And I mean, we've got over 24 different communities in BC with Seniors for Climate, which is so exciting. And then almost 100 across Canada just with Seniors for Climate, not Draw the Line, but a lot of us are aligned. And so, we're just looking because we're not giving up. I mean, we're just not giving up. We are committed to creating a better future for our families, and we can do it. All of the parts are there. We just have to make that shift to build on our hope. And then
And I'll be carrying my frack-free sign.
Yay! And then on Sunday in Penticton at Gyro Park, there's going to be I think it's 2 o'clock, maybe 2:30, there's going to be Sing for Peace. And that is joining some 100 communities all around the world at 2 o'clock in different places. They're all singing for peace. And I think that's really nice. I don't know if there's anything happening in Kelowna area. And so, share all of this, share the draw the line, share the connect the dots. And yeah, it's so great that we're able to work together to, move that little needle. So thank
I
you.
just want to, say thank you so much for having me. It's like always such a joy to, sort of get to be at these types of events and like work with your communities. And I find the work that you're doing, they're super inspiring, and your drive is just like so amazing to see. So it's really just like such a privilege to have been able to spend the evening with you. So thank you.
Thank you, Kiki. And
Thank you.
everybody, we are sending
Good
out
night, everyone.
recording tomorrow or the next day. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Kiki, I'll be